Whispers of Franklin Castle. The wind howled through the broken windows of Franklin Castle, carrying with it the voices of the past. The grand, decaying mansion stood in eerie defiance against the night sky, its Gothic turrets silhouetted against the moon's glow. For decades, stories of strange occurrences, ghostly apparitions, and unexplained disappearances had surrounded the house, making it one of Cleveland's most infamous haunted locations. Ethan Carter, a struggling journalist, had spent years chasing ghost stories, but none had ever felt real, until now. When he was assigned to investigate Franklin Castle for a Halloween special, he thought it would be just another fabricated tale, something he could debunk with logical explanations. But as he stepped through the massive oak doors, a deep, suffocating chill wrapped around him, and he knew this place was different. The house had a way of breathing, as if it were alive. The walls creaked, whispering unintelligible words, and shadows danced where no light should be. Ethan's footsteps echoed unnaturally through the vast corridors as he made his way deeper into the house. He had read the history, tales of secret passages, mysterious deaths, and a family torn apart by tragedy. But reading about Franklin Castle and standing within its haunted walls were two very different experiences. Then the whispering started. At first, it was subtle, like the wind slipping through the cracks, but soon, the voices grew louder, pleading warning. Ethan turned sharply, heart pounding. He wasn't alone. Ethan tightened his grip on the flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the suffocating darkness. He had come prepared, camera, recorder, extra batteries, but now, standing in the heart of Franklin Castle, technology felt useless. He reached the grand staircase, its wooden steps groaning under his weight. As he ascended, the whispering grew stronger. He could almost make out words, fragments of sorrowful conversations, echoes of long-forgotten pain. Then he saw her. At the top of the stairs, a woman in a Victorian dress stood motionless, her face obscured by shadows. Ethan froze. His brain scrambled for logic. Was this a trick of the light? A mannequin left behind by some previous investigator? Then she moved, slowly, unnaturally, her head tilted toward him. The shadows parted just enough for Ethan to see her eyes, hollow, empty, and filled with an ancient sadness. His body screamed for him to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Then, with an agonizing creak, the woman raised a hand and pointed down the hallway. A silent command. Ethan swallowed hard. He could leave, walk out now and never look back. But this was his chance to capture something real, to finally prove to the world that ghosts existed. Steeling himself, he stepped forward. The hallway stretched endlessly, lined with closed doors. Ethan moved carefully, the floorboards protesting beneath him. He followed the direction the ghost had pointed, feeling an invisible force guiding him. He stopped before a door different from the others, older, heavier. It looked wrong, as if it didn't belong to this era. Ethan reached for the handle, his fingers hesitating on the cold brass. The moment he touched it, the whispering ceased. A thick silence filled the house, pressing down on him. He twisted the handle. The door swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Ethan flicked his flashlight downward, revealing stone walls lined with flickering candles. Candles that should not be burning in an abandoned house. His heart pounded. Someone or something had been here recently. He stepped inside. Ethan took a cautious step onto the stone staircase, his flashlight beam flickering as if protesting against the darkness below. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Blood? As he descended, the flickering candlelight cast shifting shadows on the walls, making the narrow space feel claustrophobic. The steps were uneven, ancient, worn down by countless footsteps before him. At the bottom, he found himself in a long, arched corridor lined with rusted iron doors. Cells. This wasn't just a basement, it was a dungeon. The history books had never mentioned this. His breath hitched as he shined his light through the iron bars of the first cell. A wooden chair sat in the center, thick leather straps hanging from its arms. Dried, dark stains marred the stone floor beneath it. A whisper slithered through the corridor. "Help us!" Ethan spun around, his flashlight shaking. No one was there. His pulse thundered in his ears. This was wrong. More than just a haunted house, this place held something much darker. He moved deeper into the corridor, trying to control his breathing. Then, from behind one of the cell doors, he heard it. Scraping. A slow, deliberate sound, like fingernails dragging against stone. Then a voice, hoarse, broken, spoke from the darkness. "You shouldn't be here." Ethan's instincts screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to stay. He raised his flashlight and peered through the bars. A face stared back at him. The figure was gaunt, skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. His eyes were hollow pits of darkness, yet somehow, Ethan knew they were locked onto him. "Who are you?" Ethan whispered. The figure didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a skeletal hand against the iron bars. The metal groaned, rust flaking away as if it were centuries old. Then suddenly the cell door burst open. Ethan stumbled backward, heart hammering. The figure stepped forward, his body flickering like a faulty projection. He raised a trembling finger and pointed down the corridor. "Find her," the ghost rasped. "She's still here." Ethan swallowed hard. "Who?" The figure's form shuddered, growing less distinct. "The girl, the one he took." Ethan clenched his fists. He had read about the legends, stories of missing children, of secret passages and hidden rooms. Could it be true? The ghost flickered once more, then vanished. The moment he disappeared, the temperature in the corridor plummeted. Ethan's breath curled in the freezing air. Then he heard it, a child's sob. Ethan followed the sound, heart pounding. It led him to a section of the basement where the walls were rougher, less refined. The sobbing grew louder. At the end of the passage stood an old wooden door, different from the iron ones of the cells. He reached for the handle, expecting resistance. The door swung open easily. Inside was a small, candlelit chamber, and in the center, huddled against the far wall, was a little girl. She was dressed in a tattered white nightgown, her dark curls matted with dust. She clutched a stuffed rabbit, her tiny shoulders shaking. Ethan knelt slowly. "Hey, it's okay. I won't hurt you." The girl lifted her head, her eyes wide, terrified, locked onto his. "He's coming," she whispered. A chill raced down Ethan's spine. "Who?" Before she could answer, the door behind him slammed shut, and then the laughter started. Low, amused, inhuman. Ethan turned slowly, dread twisting in his gut. Standing in the shadows, just beyond the flickering candlelight, was something tall, something wrong. The real horror of Franklin Castle had just begun. That Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stared into the shadows. The figure standing there was too tall, its limbs too long. Its face was obscured, but he could feel its gaze, heavy, predatory. The little girl whimpered behind him, clutching his jacket. The thing in the darkness took a step forward. The candlelight flickered violently as the temperature dropped. The shadows stretched unnaturally, crawling toward Ethan and the girl like living tendrils. Ethan clenched his fists. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice shaking. The thing chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made his stomach turn. "This house was mine before it was theirs," it said, voice dripping with malice. "And it will be mine long after you're gone." The door behind Ethan rattled. The walls trembled. The air thickened, pressing against him like unseen hands. Then the thing lunged. Ethan grabbed the girl and dove to the side. The shadows exploded, swallowing the candlelight. The room plunged into darkness. The girl screamed. Ethan scrambled for his flashlight, but the second he clicked it on, the beam flickered and died. A voice slithered through the void. "You shouldn't have come." Ethan's pulse thundered. He had to get out, fast. Then, suddenly, the little girl yanked on his sleeve. "There's a door," she whispered. His heart leaped. "Where?" She pointed to the wall. Ethan couldn't see anything, but he trusted her. He reached out, running his fingers along the cold stone. Then click, a hidden latch. The wall shifted with a groan, revealing a narrow, pitch-black passageway. Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed the girl's hand and bolted inside. The passage was suffocatingly narrow. the ceiling so low that Ethan had to hunch over as they ran. The air was damp, filled with the stench of rotting wood and something sour, something decayed. Behind them, the laughter echoed through the stone. Faster. Ethan's heart pounded as they twisted through the maze of corridors. Then light. Faint glow ahead. Hope surged through him. He sprinted forward, dragging the girl with him. The passage opened into a small chamber, and in the center stood a rotting wooden ladder leading up to a trapdoor. He didn't hesitate. "Climb!" he urged the girl, boosting her up. She scrambled onto the ladder, hands shaking as she climbed. Ethan followed close behind. The laughter grew louder, closer. The girl reached the trapdoor and shoved it open, revealing the night sky. Cold air rushed in. She climbed out. Ethan was right behind her, but just as he reached the top, something grabbed his ankle. Cold, bony fingers. Ethan's stomach dropped as a sickening force yanked him downward. He grabbed the edge of the trapdoor, fingers digging into the splintering wood. The girl screamed, reaching for him. The thing in the darkness growled. "You are mine now." Ethan's grip slipped. His strength wavered. Then suddenly the girl spoke. "Let him go." Her voice echoed with something ancient, powerful. The grip on Ethan's ankle loosened. The shadows recoiled. With one final heave, Ethan pulled himself up and out of the passage. He collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath. The girl slammed the trapdoor shut. The laughter stopped. Silence. For the first time since entering Franklin Castle, the air felt lighter. The heaviness was gone. Ethan turned to the girl, chest heaving. "What was that?" She looked at him, eyes far older than they should have been. "He can't hurt us anymore," she said softly. "Not tonight." Ethan swallowed hard. The house loomed behind them, dark and silent. But somehow he knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Ethan sat up, lungs burning as he tried to steady his breathing. The girl stood beside him, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her gaze locked on the house. He wiped the sweat from his brow. "Who are you?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned to him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight in an unnatural way. "My name is Lillian," she whispered. "I lived here, a long time ago." Ethan's stomach twisted. He had read about Lillian, a child who had vanished in Franklin Castle over a century ago. A child who was never found. His mouth went dry. "You're..." She nodded. "I never left." The realization sent a cold shiver down his spine. He had been running, protecting her, when all along she was the one protecting him. Lillian turned back to the house. "He's still down there," she said. "But not for long." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, eyes hollow yet filled with something ancient. "He's waking up, and next time he won't let us go." A deep unease settled in Ethan's chest. Franklin Castle wasn't just haunted. It was a prison, and something inside wanted out. Ethan stood, still trying to process everything. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to never return to this cursed place. But something about Lillian's words unsettled him. "What is he?" he asked. "The thing in the basement?" Lillian hugged her stuffed rabbit. "He was here before the house, before anyone." Ethan's pulse quickened. He had assumed the entity was a spirit, maybe a vengeful ghost. But this was something else, something much older. "He feeds on people," Lillian continued. "On fear, on pain." She glanced at Ethan. "On you." A sickening realization washed over him. The castle didn't just house ghosts. It made them. And if Ethan had died inside, he wouldn't have been the first. Lillian took his hand. "You should go." Ethan hesitated. "And you?" She gave him a sad smile. "I can't." His throat tightened. Before he could say anything, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The air shifted, thickening with something unseen. The house breathed. Lillian's grip tightened. "He's waking up." Ethan took a step back, every instinct screaming at him to run. Lillian's eyes darkened. "Don't come back, Ethan." Then, she vanished. Ethan staggered, heart racing. The night was silent again. The castle stood before him, dark and unmoving. But he knew better. It was watching, waiting, and something deep inside its walls was hungry. Ethan turned and walked away, never looking back. He had gotten out, but not everyone did. Not everyone ever would. Days after escaping Franklin Castle, Ethan tried to convince himself it was over. But deep down, he knew better. The newspaper rejected his article. Too unbelievable, his editor scoffed. A haunted house? Come on, Carter. We need facts, not campfire stories. Ethan didn't argue. He quit his job the next day. The nightmares started soon after. At first, it was just flashes. The cold stone walls, the iron doors of the dungeon, Lillian's hollow eyes. But then they grew worse. He would wake up gasping for breath, convinced he could hear the whispering. You shouldn't have come back. Except, he hadn't gone back. Had he? One night, Ethan woke to find himself standing in his own living room, staring at his front door. His fingers were curled around the doorknob. His heart pounded. He didn't remember getting out of bed. Then he heard it. A soft knock. He froze. The knock came again, gentle, almost polite. Ethan swallowed hard. His apartment was on the 3rd floor. He took a step back. His pulse roared in his ears. Then, from the other side of the door, a child's voice. Ethan, let me in. His blood turned to ice. Lillian. The air thickened, the temperature plummeting. His breath curled in the dim light. He backed away, shaking his head. No, you're not real. Silence. Then, he's here. A shadow moved under the door. A cold whisper slithered into his ear. You brought me with you. The lights flickered. The whispering returned, growing louder. More voices. More things. Ethan clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices were inside him now. He stumbled backward, heart hammering, as the walls of his apartment seemed to pulse, breathe. The shadows stretched toward him. The laughter started again. Low, amused, inhuman, just like before. Franklin Castle hadn't let him go. It never would.